Dimple, thank you for joining us today
Okay.
for our legacy project to share your background with us and answer a few questions.
Okay.
Our project is called Her Legacy Women of Fort Collins, and we're very excited to be able to honor you and have you a part of this and
Okay.
share your background with young girls and others in the community. So we have a few questions we'd like to ask you. Would you share with us what have you done that has led to you being honored as a woman of legacy?
Well, I've been around the cattle industry for a long time, and I started out in the 70s, and being a woman in the man's industry in the 70s was hard, because back in the 70s in Arizona feed yards, women only worked in the office. They didn't work out in the yards. Well, I decided I wanted to work out in the yards, and I wanted to handle cattle. And one of the things I learned is I had to be the very best at what I did. I also wrote for our state farm magazine, the Arizona Farmer Ranchman magazine, again back in the 70s. Went to go to the Arizona Cattle Feeders meeting. They didn't want to let me in, but I finally convinced them, and I made sure when I covered that meeting, I didn't misquote anybody. Thing is, when you're a girl, you got to be twice as good as the guys. You know, like Sheryl Sandberg says, you got to lean in. You got to just do it. And in my 20s, when I got the opportunity to get my first big design job, designing the dipping vat system that was shown in the movie, the manager of a large feed yard came up to me and asked me if I would design it. And I said, give me 3 weeks, because I knew it would take me time to get the information and knowledge I needed. I took that job at the 60% level of competence. I've since read in Sheryl Sandberg's book, Lean In, that most women won't take a job at the 60% level of competence. They want to be 90%. Guy will take it at 60%. But then I've seen guys get too cocky and take it at the 20% level and make a multi-million dollars worth of mistakes because they had such a big fat ego they didn't bother to learn the things they should have learned.
I agree with you. Yes, and so that leads us right into our next question about what is your definition of success? And the other part of that is, what 1 or 2 personality traits do you think most allow a woman to become successful in her life?
Well, if it's career, and career is a very important part of my life, it's perseverance. I'll never forget when Norb, the plant superintendent at the Swift plant, told me when I made my own internship there, you got to keep persevering. You don't want to go about there and pound your head against a brick wall, but you got to just keep forging ahead. Also, another thing I did is I had more than one project going at a time. So if one project failed, I'd have something else. You know, I never will forget when I was at Arizona State University, looking at this, the writing someone put on the art room wall. Obstacles are those terrible things you see when you take your eyes off the goal. I've since learned that was written by Henry Ford, but I didn't know that in the 70s because there was no internet then to look it up on.
That's good advice from him.
Yeah.
What motivates you?
Well, I get asked a lot, parents of kids that are autistic or have some problems, what motivates me? I got motivated to study when education became a goal. When I was in high school, I was an awful student. And then my science teacher came around and he got me interested in science. Now, if I wanted to be a scientist, I had to study. So now, studying was a pathway to a goal. I think that's really important. Education just can't be an end in itself. Because I'm seeing too many smart kids that might get some label put on them, and they're going nowhere when they graduate because there was no goal.
And so what I hear you say is that your science teacher helped direct you to help you find a goal in your life.
Well, that's right. And the goal became going to graduate school and becoming a scientist. So then I knuckled down and studied. Well, prior to that, I just messed around, but I was cleaning a lot of horse stalls and learning how to work. What I'm seeing with a lot of kids today, they might have Tourette's, they might have dyslexia, they might have mild autism, and they're becoming their diagnosis. That's becoming their total identity. And they're not learning how to work. When I was 15 and I was not doing any studying, I was running the horse barn. And I was proud of the fact that I ran the horse barn. I think he's trying to get somebody to stop this noise or something.
Okay. So what obstacles have you faced in achieving your goals, and how did you overcome them?
Well, these questions are always almost so abstract I can't answer. You know, it's sort of like you live one day at a time, and I'm seeing that there was kind of a goal. I was working on improving cattle handling in the cattle industry, and I found that I could improve it one feed yard at a time. When I got a manager who got interested in improving the cattle handling. Another thing I learned early in my career is selling equipment was a whole lot easier than getting people to operate it correctly. People want the thing more than they want the management. You know, the new computer system, the drug, you know, whatever the thing is.
Is there any one obstacle that you found early on when you were working in a man's world that challenged you to figure out a way to
Well, I had
be
a
successful?
ranch foreman was slapping me on the butt and stuff like that. And then he told his boss that the corral system didn't work. You know, when you have a person who's a boss, you know, doing the sexual stuff, that's extremely difficult to deal with because they can affect your career.
Right.
I knew how to handle it in colleagues because I just start it right back if they want to start that stuff. But when it's a boss doing things like that, you know, and the owner was dissatisfied with the project because the foreman told him it didn't work because I told him to get lost when he slapped me on the butt.
Standing up for yourself.
Yeah. But when it's a boss, I can deal with a lot of stuff. You know, I talked to a lady who became the manager for a very big chicken processing plant. She was rather young, and I said, "How'd you handle all the guys?" "Well, I'm the plant manager, and I had to join the little boys club." But when you get that kind of stuff going on, it's a boss doing it to you. That's extremely difficult.
Yes.
Because they can affect your career.
Right. So what has been your greatest accomplishment, do you think, in your endeavors?
Well, when it comes to improving how animals are traded, I first thought I could do it all with equipment. That's what I thought in the 70s when I was in my 20s. Then I started training employees. But then I learned how to train managers because you get managers to buy in. But the thing that made the biggest amount of change was when I worked for McDonald's on implementing their animal welfare program. I developed a very simple scoring system for evaluating meat packing plants for animal welfare. Scores like vocalization, squealing in pigs, electric pride use. And when I had the power of McDonald's behind me in 1999, I saw more change than I'd seen in my whole life prior to that. That was a massive big tipping point. Now people had to operate equipment I had designed correctly.
And did you create the training programs then as well?
Yes, I created a lot of training programs. And now I spend most of my consulting time working with the buyers. And we got to have sensible stuff. One of the things that concerns me on a lot of policy stuff is you got young people going into different policy making positions and they have no hands-on practical experience with the thing that they're making policy about. It all becomes way too abstract. I call that abstractification. In fact, I talked about that in my book on Animals in Translation. You know, if you're going to make policy about something, anything, I don't care what it is, you better get out in the field and find out what that policy's going to do to different types of people out in the field.
And to me, that would be common sense.
But that's not happening. But now, students are even getting more abstract because they're not doing hands-on things anymore. Just the other day, I read in the paper that Home Depot has to come out with a video on how to use a tape measure because that was a top search term of stuff people wanted to know.
It's a sad commentary on how things have changed.
Well, I think it's also going to make more problems with making practical decision making about a lot of stuff because it gets too theoretical. I had a young freshman come up to me, called me up on the phone and said, "Well, can you make slaughterhouses perfect?" I said, "I can't make anything that's in the practical world perfect. I can make it really, really good to a really high standard, but I can't make it perfect. Perfection's not possible with something in the practical world, anything."
And you're dealing with human beings who are creating the end result. it's not you creating the end result necessarily. It's you have to rely on everybody else who's actually working in that plant to follow through.
That's right. And I've worked in a lot of plants, and the plant manager makes a really big difference. Back when I was doing those McDonald's audits in 1999, we had 75 plants on the approved supplier list. Only 3 had to build something expensive. We were able to fix most of them with a lot of simple changes like non-slip flooring. But 3 plants out of the 75, they had to get rid of the plant manager. Nothing was going to change until he was gone.
And I think we see that, don't we, in most big companies, that the culture starts at the top.
The top sets the tone for the whole place. And the top has also got to drill down, find out what's going on, out there in the trenches in whatever the company is. You can take hotels, for example. I go around to a lot of hotels, and I can see which brands where they just weren't sending out enough mystery shoppers, and things were starting to slip.
Starting at the bottom and learning what's working and what isn't is a good idea with the mystery shoppers.
You better make sure that what you claim you're doing, you're actually doing.
Right, thank you. What has inspired you the most in your life? And how have they done that? Who or what has inspired you the most in your life?
Well, when I was young, the most important people in my life when I was in high school, it was my aunt out at the ranch and Mr. Carlock, my science teacher. And I was not doing very much studying. I didn't see the point in studying. But Mr. Carlock got me interested in all kinds of optical illusion things I could build. And then I became motivated to become a scientist. Then I knuckled down and I studied. And then out on my aunt's ranch, I got exposed to the beef cattle industry. I get asked all the time, how did you get involved in the cattle industry? I was exposed to it. Students get interested in careers they get exposed to. If you're not exposed to it, you're not going to get interested in it.
Right. And they don't have enough options to consider.
I'm concerned about all the hands-on things taken out of the schools. Woodworking, welding, auto mechanics, cooking, sewing, theater. These are all things that can go into careers. I think there's way too much emphasis on sports. Most of these kids are not going to have sports as a career. I think something's wrong when a high school spends $400 on sports stuff, $400,000, excuse me, spends $400,000 on sports stuff, then cuts band due to lack of funding, and you're much more likely to get a career in music than you are playing sports.
I agree with you. Would you share with us, what does it mean to be a woman of legacy?
Well, that's a hard one. I have a lot of children write to me, and they look up to me, that I'm inspiring them to succeed. They might be mildly autistic, but so is half of Silicon Valley. You wouldn't have any video camera to videotape this with if it wasn't for a little bit of autism. And I'm seeing too many of these kids kind of get a handicap mentality where the autism is becoming their identity instead of a career. And when you look at a lot of common last names, they are jobs. Baker, cook, carpenter, farmer, those are real common names. They're all jobs. You see, and that's the identity. And I want to see these kids get out, get in a career they like. And a lot of these kids are not learning how to work. You need to learn how to work before you graduate from high school.
Right. I
agree. In this state, you can do safe retail jobs at age 14. That's when it needs to start. And you can be doing volunteer jobs outside the family before that. Something as simple as walking dogs or a church or a volunteer community center job or whatever.
No, I agree with that. What does receiving this honor mean to you?
Well, I'm really pleased that I'm chosen to be one of the ones in Fort Collins. I had somebody ask me the other day how I liked getting recognized in the airport and stuff like this. And I said, it's a responsibility. I've always got to be on good behavior.
And you've been a wonderful role model over the years to young adults.
I want to see kids be successful. And I see a kid get a mild autism label, and then sometimes the parents get so overprotective. The kid's not learning basic skills like shopping. Go in a store and just buy something. And he's in his late teens and he's never gone in the store and bought something. They're getting so hung up on the label. And just recently I visited the Kennedy Space Center, and I was invited down there by the disabilities people. There's people at the Kennedy Space Center designing big, important stuff that have Tourette's, have dyslexia, were a bad student. This one had super good math scores. Then I go back and forth between the silos, and they get too hung up on that label. You go out to Silicon Valley, half those programmers are on the autism spectrum. A brain can either be more thinking or a brain can be more social emotional. And I got very emotional when I visited Kennedy Space Center, and I got the VIP tour. I got to go inside the vehicle assembly building. I got to go on top of the assembly building roof and look out where the crawler takes the vehicle out to the launch pad. And I looked up the vehicle assembly building last night, and I was pretty sure they'd done the moon rocket there, but I had to be sure. Yes, it was built for the moon rocket. When we did the Saturn V, when we did sort of our greatest achievement, you know, and you think, why were those space flights important? Part of it is to inspire. It's pure exploration. And when we stop doing things like that, we kind of stagnate. I'm really happy that SpaceX now and Amazon have got, you know, now building rockets, and I got to see a launch, and that was really cool. And for all you techie kids out there, they're hiring right now. I went and looked at their job boards. They like electrical engineering, put some mechanical and some computer science in along with it. Bachelor's degree, that's all you need. And do an internship, and they say in polite talk, we will work your butt off.
That's good. We were visiting before we started the interview. We were talking about the importance of young adults having internships and experiences.
Oh, I think internships are really important. You know, when I was in college, my mother and the teachers, we made up our own internships. In the 70s, internships were not formal things. And I actually made my own internship at the Swift plant in Arizona, now at the feed yards. But when I was in college in the late 60s, I did an internship at a research lab where I did a research with pharmaceuticals on mice. I was a aide for an autistic child. I was out at my aunt's ranch. Now, internship programs, every department has them, and we have lots of them in animal science, all different parts of the beef industry. Students need to do these internships so you can try on careers. Find out what you like, find out what you hate, but try on careers.
I agree. Those experiences are very important. Our last question is, what advice would you give to a young woman today who is trying to find the path to achieving her goals?
All right, give me an age.
Let's say high school, 9 through 12.
9 through 12, get out and volunteer at different stuff. Again, I'm so concerned about all the hands-on classes that have been taken out because those classes provided opportunities to try on stuff. Well, theater, for example, that's a career that's not going to get replaced with you know, artificial intelligence or computers. Plumbing, woodworking, auto shop. There's huge shortage right now of people that do these things. But you're not going to know whether you like it unless you try it. And unfortunately, the schools have removed the chance to try it. Also, I think these things teach practical problem solving. Hands-on stuff teaches a reality. Sometimes the stuff you do doesn't always work. So then you got to figure out how to make it work. In fact, we were discussing at lunch what I'd like to see for a robotics competition so our low-income kids could get into it. I'd like to see a $200 limit placed on the price of the robot. So you buy the electronics, but let's go out and get old forklift pallets and bicycle chains and just scavenge old junk and figure out how to make a robot do something. You know, have like a junkyard class. And I think that would challenge creativity more than going and buying expensive parts to duplicate a box handling system we got at the Cargill plant.
Right. And the other thing that it does that we talked about briefly was the communication skills that are being challenged for young adults as they grow up with computers and iPads and all of that.
We have got to have time away from phones. I have been reading some of the journal articles on the suicide and the depression. Teens that spend too much time on electronics and media. It has skyrocketed. It's gone up like 3 times. Got to get these kids off of this. I'm not suggesting banning it. No, hour a day for social media. You can still do it, but they need to be doing other things, learning how to communicate. I have been a professor at Colorado State for 26 and a half years. And I notice now when I ask a student to call me, they're more reluctant to call me. Well, learn how to use that phone helped me get my business started. Because I'd cold call meat companies when I found out they were doing remodeling. That's how I sold Cargill in the late 80s. And I sent them a portfolio of my work, drawings and pictures. And I have designed all the stockyards and chutes and restrainer system for the Greeley plant, for Fort Morgan, for all the other Cargill beef plants. Because I sent out a packet of information, cold.
You were taking the initiative.
Taking the initiative to do it. But you've got kids today, they get a little mild autism diagnosis or something, they're getting so sheltered they're not even learning laundry and shopping. It's just ridiculous. I've talked to a lot of employers, and we got lots of good young people out there, but it's sort of like you're getting them as teenagers. They haven't grown up yet. I talked to a company that hired a meat company, that hired undergraduates, business majors, and these kids thought they could email grocery stores and tell them how to set up the meat case. They pulled them out in the stores and they made them set it up. So they take all the meat, tray packed meat, and put it in the case like this. You can't see it, and there's going to be a watery mess down the bottom of that pack. So what happened a year later, 2 years later? One of them discovered sales, one of them ended up doing computer office stuff, and one ended up quitting. But they're just not getting enough hands-on stuff doing stuff. Also, another thing they did in the office is they were forbidden to text or email in the office. You had to go walk over to the other cube and talk to someone.
Well, I think those are wonderful examples that we've talked about today. Thank you very much for taking your time to share this.
The other thing you got to do is as Sheryl Sandberg says, you got to lean in. You got to speak up at meetings. That's something I was never bashful about doing that.
Well, thank you very much for your time today.
Okay, it's good to talk to you.
Thank you very much. We appreciate everything that you've done, and especially for young girls, to help encourage them, and young men to encourage them to get out and about.
I have young students, some of them they're really getting out in meat plants for the first time, and they're finding out they're liking it. Like, go out in the middle of the night to find out how much space cattle need to lie down at night. So Helen's out there 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning trying to get a GoPro fastened on a catwalk. If she goes up on the catwalk, the cattle get up. So she's got to put the GoPro up there in the daytime and then come back at night and hope she can trigger it with her cell phone when all the cattle are laying down. Because you walk on the catwalk to get up. She found out she liked doing that stuff.
Yeah, wonderful experiences.
Okay.
Thank you very much.